Welcome to True Crime Cases Today. We are unveiling a shocking story of jealousy and violence in the quiet town of Maplewood, where everyone knew each other's names and secrets were hard to keep. Freya Morgan was a respected figure, a skilled physician with a thriving practice. She was known for her compassion, dedication, and the calm demeanor she brought into every patient room. But beneath the surface of her seemingly perfect life, Freya was hiding a web of deceit that would eventually lead to a shocking murder that no one saw coming. This is the story of how respected doctors' secret life of infidelity with her patients unraveled, leading to a tragic end that shook the entire community. Freya Morgan appeared to have it all: successful medical practice, a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood, and a loving husband, Henry, who had always been her biggest supporter. Henry, a high school history teacher, was proud of his wife's accomplishments and often bragged about her to his colleagues and friends. To everyone who knew them, Freya and Henry seemed to be the perfect couple: intelligent, kind, and deeply in love. Their relationship had begun during their college years, where Freya had been pursuing a degree in medicine and Henry had been studying education. They were the couple that everyone admired, with Henry's easygoing nature complementing Freya's driven and ambitious personality. After graduation, they moved to Maplewood, where Freya established her medical practice and Henry began teaching at the local high school. Over the years, they built a life together that seemed unshakable, filled with mutual respect, love, and shared dreams. But as the years passed, Freya's life as a doctor became more demanding. The long hours, the stress of managing her practice, and the emotional toll of dealing with sick patients began to weigh on her. Henry noticed the change in his wife, but he chalked it up to the pressures of her career. He tried to support her as best he could, taking on more responsibilities at home and encouraging her to take time for herself. However, what Henry didn't know was that Freya's growing restlessness wasn't just due to the pressures of her job. Something far more sinister was brewing beneath the surface, something that would eventually tear their lives apart. It began innocently enough. Freya had always been empathetic towards her patients, often going above and beyond to make them feel comfortable and cared for. But there was one patient who stood out: William, a successful businessman who had been coming to see Freya for regular checkups. William was charming, confident, and attentive in a way that Freya found herself drawn to at first. Their interactions were strictly professional, but over time, a flirtatious rapport developed between them. William would make casual Williams about how beautiful Freya looked, or how lucky her husband must be to have her. Freya, flattered by the attention, found herself looking forward to William's appointments more than she should have. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, William asked Freya if she would like to grab a drink with him to unwind. It was an innocent enough suggestion, but Freya knew that it crossed a line. Still, she agreed, convincing herself that it was just a friendly outing. They went to a quiet bar on the outskirts of town, where they talked for hours about life, work, and everything in between. As the night wore on, the conversation took a more personal turn. William confided in Freya about the struggles in his own marriage, and Freya found herself opening up about her own feelings of dissatisfaction and loneliness. They both knew that they were treading dangerous territory, but neither of them seemed willing to pull back. One drink turned into two, and before Freya knew it, they were sharing a passionate kiss in the dimly lit corner of the bar. It was a moment of weakness, a fleeting lapse in judgment, but it was also the beginning of something much darker. The affair with William became a regular occurrence, with secret meetings and late night rendezvous becoming a part of Freya's routine. Freya told herself that it was just a fling, something to help her escape the pressures of her life. But deep down, she knew that she was playing with fire. As Freya's affair with William continued, she found herself drawn to the thrill of the forbidden, the secrecy, the lies, the excitement of being with someone other than her husband. It all became an addictive escape from the monotony of her everyday life. But William wasn't the only patient who caught Freya's eye. She found herself in similar entanglements with other patients. There was Daniel, a young lawyer who was dealing with the stress of a high-profile case. He came to Freya for stress management and anxiety treatment, but their sessions quickly turned into something much more personal. Daniel was vulnerable and in need of comfort, and Freya was more than willing to provide it. Then there was Jackson, a widower who had been struggling with depression after the death of his wife. Freya had always had a soft spot for Jackson, and their professional relationship gradually evolved into an emotional affair. Jackson was grateful for the attention and care that Freya showed him, and he began to aid on her not just as his doctor, but as a confidant and friend. Two more patients followed: Carter, an artist with a troubled past, and Ryan, a former soldier dealing with PTSD. Each of them found solace in Freya, and each of them became entangled in her web of deceit. To Freya, these affairs were a way to cope with her own unhappiness, a way to feel desired and needed in a way that her marriage no longer provided. But the more affairs she had, the more complicated her life became. Freya was constantly juggling lies, sneaking around, and living in fear of being caught. She knew that what she was doing was wrong, but the thrill of the secret relationships was too intoxicating to give up. Meanwhile, Henry was beginning to notice changes in his wife that he couldn't ignore. Freya was often distant, distracted, and irritable. She spent more time at the office. When she was home, she was always on her phone, texting or checking messages. Henry tried to talk to her about it, but Freya brushed off his concerns, insisting that she was just stressed from work. But Henry couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He started paying more attention to Freya's behavior, noticing the way she would smile at her phone or the way she seemed to be lost in thought more often than not. He even began to wonder if there was someone else in her life, but he pushed the thought aside, not wanting to believe that his beloved wife could be unfaithful. One day, Henry decided to surprise Freya by bringing her lunch at the office. He knew she had been working long hours and thought it would be a nice gesture. But when he arrived at the clinic, he was told that Freya was out to lunch with a patient. Henry felt a pang of jealousy, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. He waited in her office for her to return. But when Freya walked in, she was visibly startled to see him. "Henry, what are you doing here?" Freya asked her, voice trembling slightly. "I thought I'd surprise you with lunch," Henry replied, trying to keep his tone light. "But I see you already have plans." Freya quickly recovered from her initial shock and forced a smile. "Oh, it was just a last-minute thing. A patient was having a tough day, and I thought it would be good to talk over lunch. But I'd love to have lunch with you too. Let's go." As they sat down to eat, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that Freya was hiding something from him. He tried to engage her in conversation, but she was distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. Henry knew that he needed to get to the bottom of whatever was going on. but he didn't want to confront Freya without more evidence. He decided to give it more time, hoping that she would come to him and tell him the truth. But Freya had no intention of confessing. She was too deep into her affairs, too consumed by the lies she had been telling. And as time went on, the strain on her marriage grew, pushing her and Henry further apart. The breaking point came one evening when Henry received an anonymous letter in the mail. The letter contained no return address, just a single piece of paper with a typed message: "Your wife is cheating on you." With multiple patients, Henry's heart sank as he read the words. He had always feared that Freya might be unfaithful, but seeing it in black and white was like a punch to the gut. He sat down, trying to process the information, but his mind was racing. Who had sent the letter? Was it true? And if so, how long had this been going on? Henry knew he couldn't ignore the letter. He decided to confront Freya that evening, hoping that she would deny the accusations and put his mind at peace. But when he showed her the letter, Freya's reaction was not what he had expected. She paled, her eyes widening in shock as she read the note. "Henry, I don't know who sent this, but it's not true," she stammered. But Henry could see the fear in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she held the letter. He knew then that the letter was telling the truth. His wife had been cheating on him, and the realization shattered him. "How long, Freya?" Henry asked, his voice breaking. "How long have you been lying to me?" Freya tried to deny it, but the weight of her guilt was too much to bear. She could see the hurt in Henry's eyes, the betrayal written all over his face. Her defenses crumbled, and she broke down, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Henry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I never meant to hurt you. It just happened." Henry felt his world collapsing around him. The woman he had loved and trusted for so many years had been living a double life, hiding her affairs with patience behind the facade of a loving wife. The pain was unbearable, and he didn't know how to respond. He felt a surge of anger and sadness all at once, but most of all, he felt an overwhelming sense of loss of the life he thought he had, loss of the future he had envisioned with Freya. "Why, Freya?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why would you do this? Wasn't I enough for you?" Freya couldn't meet his gaze. She couldn't explain the reasons behind her actions because even she didn't fully understand them. The thrill of the affairs, the escape from her own unhappiness, the need to feel desired, it had all driven her to make choices she now deeply regretted. "I'm so sorry, Henry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you. I've made so many mistakes, and I wish I could take it all back." But Henry couldn't find it in himself to forgive her, not in that moment. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too fresh. He stood up and walked out of the room, leaving Freya alone with her guilt and shame. In the days that followed, Henry's pain turned to anger. He couldn't stop thinking about the letter, the affairs, and the lies Freya had told him. His trust in her was shattered, and he felt like a fool for not seeing the signs earlier. The love he had once felt for her was now tainted by the bitterness of betrayal. Freya, too, was spiraling. She tried to reach out to Henry to mend the rift between them, but he had shut her out completely. The silence between them was deafening, and Freya felt like she was drowning in her own guilt. Her affairs had given her temporary escape from her problems, but now she was facing the consequences of her actions, and the weight of it was crushing her. The patients with whom she had been involved began to distance themselves, sensing that something had changed in Freya. The Excitement and allure that had once drawn them to her were gone, replaced by a sense of unease and tension. Freya's practice began to suffer as a result, with patients canceling appointments and rumors spreading about her unprofessional behavior. As her life continued to unravel, Freya found herself feeling more isolated than ever. The affairs that had once brought her excitement and fulfillment now seemed hollow and meaningless. She had lost everything that mattered to her marriage, her career, and the respect of the community. And with each passing day, the guilt and regret grew stronger, gnawing at her from the inside out. Henry's anger and resentment festered over time, consuming him from the inside. He couldn't let go of the betrayal, couldn't find a way to move past the pain. The love he once felt for Freya had turned into something dark and twisted, a pure, poisonous mix of rage and heartbreak that he couldn't escape. One night, after weeks of sleepless nights and obsessive thoughts, Henry reached his breaking point. He couldn't bear the thought of living in the same house with Freya any longer, but he also couldn't bring himself to leave. He felt trapped in a nightmare, unable to find a way out. In a fit of desperation, Henry decided to confront Freya one last time. He needed answers, needed to understand why she had done what she did. He stormed into the bedroom where Freya was sitting on the edge of the bed, lost in her own thoughts. "Why, Freya," Henry demanded, his voice trembling with anger. "Why did you do this to us too? Me, I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Freya looked up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry, Henry," she said softly. "I don't know what else to say. I've made so many mistakes, and I can't change what I've done." But her apology only fueled Henry's rage. He couldn't accept that she had thrown away their life together for meaningless affairs with her. Patience in his mind, she had destroyed everything they had built, and he couldn't forgive her for it. In that moment, something snapped inside Henry. He felt a surge of anger so intense that it overwhelmed his senses, clouding his judgment. Without thinking, he grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass paper weight from Freya's desk, and hurled it at her in a blind rage. The paperweight struck Freya on the side of her head with a sickening thud, and she collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around her. Henry stood there, frozen in shock, as the reality of what he had just done began